So I joined the Air National Guard, the Massachusetts Air National Guard, in 1982, the year I graduated high school.
All right.
And so in a typical guardsman, you go away for training, you come back, you perform your duties, 1 week in a month. And at that time, I was in heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and I was working in the private sector doing HVAC. And serving in the Guard part-time. I was a Air Force Security Forces or security policeman at the time.
And well, it wasn't until years later until you went to Iraq. But before then, what were you doing?
So, throughout my career, I always seemed to be moving forward. So I spent 10 years enlisted, rose to the rank of E5, and then had an opportunity to be commissioned. So I got commissioned as a second lieutenant. I took over a flight on the base. We were a 104th Fighter Group at that time. We flew A-10 Warthogs, and I had a flight there that was part of the support structure. And so I had that going on for a while, and then I rolled into a squadron, and I was still part-time at that point. And then I came on full-time on the base and took on another squadron at that stage, again in the support side of the house. Worked there for a number of years, and then went back to the corporate sector. Worked there for a number of years, but moved into aircraft maintenance with the A-10, and then became an A-10 maintenance officer. And that was when I started to have the opportunity to deploy, because it always seemed that when I was enlisted cop in 1990, just before I got commissioned, Desert Storm kicked off, but I was going to the academy, the Academy of Military Science that the Air National Guard has. And so I kind of missed that. And then when Operation Deliberate Force kicked off, I had just transitioned into a new career field. And so I kind of missed that opportunity. And then Operation Allied Force kicked off, and I was the brand new A-10 maintenance officer on the base. And so all the other maintenance officers went, and I stayed back and ran maintenance operations full-time while they were all deployed. So it wasn't until 2003 that after 9/11, and we started seeing the build-up towards Operation Iraqi Freedom, that I ended up deploying as an A-10 maintenance officer. And so got notification that we were deploying in January of 23, was out the door, and we deployed to a classified location where we basically, my component flight that I was in charge of at that time, we were in charge of basically keeping all the back shops going and making sure that all those systems on the A-10 aircraft were constantly mission ready. And so we supported the flight line operation, and they, of course, were the folks that did all of the crew chief operations. They did the weapons loaders. They're the ones that loaded all the munitions brought out by the munitions troops. And we flew sorties over there. The pilots flew sorties for about 4 months. We had an air tasking order where we would load the A-10s up. They would fly off from a classified location. They would take care of their particular mission set that they needed to do that at that time, come back, we'd load them back up. And we pretty much did that for about 4 months until there was nothing left to shoot at.
And this was the actual invasion of Iraq, not like occupy this. When we're occupying, this is like when we're first going.
Right. This is the kickoff of Operation Iraqi Freedom here in 2003. So we were actually in theater before the war kicked off, because our mission was to do certain things at that time, again classified, that would make the ground forces have it a little easier as they went in.
Now you said classified. Was this still in Iraq, or you're somewhere else, like in Saudi Arabia?
Well, that's why they still have it as a classified location. So we were there to basically support operations for the ground guys and the special ops guys there that were operating in Iraq.
Well, what was Operation Iraqi Freedom like from your point of view?
Well, my first tour was everything that you would think. It was remote. We had really not a lot of support structures there. We all lived out of tents. We operated and worked out of those tents. It was hot, cold. We ate MREs mostly. We got a hot meal once in a while. You were going out to get your hot meal or your coffee at that stage, and so yeah, we were pretty isolated. There wasn't a lot of communications back home. There wasn't a lot of that opportunity at this point. So yeah, pretty much what you did is you worked, slept for the entire time we were there.
Was there any threat of Saddam Hussein's forces, or you're so?
Yeah, well, we didn't have direct force-on-force type of threat, but there was always the issue of insurgents, or knowing where we were, looking to disrupt operations. I mean, what we were doing, we were surrounded by a lot of the special operations folks that were operating in and out of our base here, and supporting them with the A-10s at this stage. So, one of the things I remember was that there was a big push towards the Haditha Dam, that Saddam Hussein's forces wanted to basically blow that dam up, thereby killing everybody in the valley. And our special operations forces and others were engaged in a very difficult battle around that dam. And our A-10s were equipped with a brand new targeting pod that we had actually been, the Skunk Works, helping develop it and fielding it. And so the joint forces guys on the ground here were able to call in the A-10s because they knew they had the targeting pod, and they knew the targeting pod could ID and target these artillery pieces that were down there that were shooting at the guys, that were shooting at the Marines and the Special Forces folks that were trying to prevent the Iraqi forces from blowing up the dam here. So, that was pretty good to know that we were having that direct impact with supporting our A-10s and our A-10 pilots flying those missions into that area.
So how long were you in this location for?
So my deployment was about 5 months, and then everything there was nothing more for our mission to accomplish, and they said, all right, because we were flying A-10s, we're good now, and they redeployed us back out of the theater back home.
What was your unit called?
So we were the 387th Air Expeditionary Group.
So from 2003 to 2007, what were you doing for those?
Yeah, so I came back and I was essentially still doing the aircraft maintenance operations, and still the aircraft maintenance squadron commander for the A-10s. And then in 2006, I ended up taking over the Security Forces squadron on the base. I had been prior Security Forces enlisted, so I had the opportunity to take over the unit that I had prior, been serving with. And we got notification that we were in a rotation to go to Iraq. So I became the point of contact. I was going to be the Defense Force commander in Sather Air Base in Baghdad, Iraq. And I had a deployment of about 300, both active duty Air Force and Air National Guard Security Forces members that were going to come together from around the country, and we were all going to deploy into Iraq at that time. So probably the majority of, better part of 2007, I spent time organizing that all together, and we deployed in January of 2008, and we were operating in Baghdad at Sather Air Base.
Yeah, at this point, it's no longer a conventional war. This is a war on insurgents. What was that like?
So this was actually during, as you can remember, there was the ups and downs, and this was actually when the surge was happening. So there was a big push of forces into Iraq. And what we were seeing then was a much bigger fight than had been happening before, because we were going to go into the cities. We were going to go and root out all the Iraqi forces and all of the supporting forces that Saddam Hussein was using. So it became very, very difficult during that time for everybody that was there. We were on an air base, and my job was to be the Defense Force commander. So I actually worked with the Army 06, that was the overall commander of the AOR in that area. And so we basically he did the outside security, I did the inside security, and we were trying to protect everything on the air base. That was a key point of transitioning supplies and fuel and everything else in and out of Iraq at that point. One of the couple of bases that would do that.
So was I wrong about that? Was it more of an insurgent war at this point, or was it still ground forces?
Yeah, so we were pretty much, we had insurgents basically around the clock. They would launch rockets or mortars at us. We had a lot of indirect fire, where you'd get the indirect fire alarm would go off, and we'd have phalanx systems that would be up there to try to engage them, to try to take them out before they hit the base. Everybody would run to the bunkers. The incoming would come in. We'd wait a while until we got the all clear, and we'd go back out and go do their job again. And it could be a couple hours, could be a couple of days before you get the next flood of rockets or mortars that would come back in. And so you kind of lived under the constant pressure that at any one time you could have, a couple dozen rockets coming at you, or a couple dozen, mortars coming at you, or just maybe one rocket would come in, and they were always trying to target where they knew, the operations were. So we could tell where the point of origin and the point of impact, and they would track that with these different radars. So we could see they'd be just outside of our perimeter, and they would typically cruise up in a truck. They'd flip open the canvas. They'd have 6 or 7 rocket launchers right there. They'd fire them all off, and they'd try to get out of town before the Army Reaction Force, the QRF, could come in and basically take them out. And sometimes they were successful to get out of there, and sometimes they weren't successful. Sometimes the QRFs were able to identify them, or the Army had the opportunity to do a counter battery. So they would launch their rockets, but the Army would know where they came from, and if it was an approved mission where, for example, there wasn't any collateral damage that would happen, they would offer counter battery and take those guys out, or they would be able to action them directly by having a patrol or something in that area there. So that was probably from about, I would say probably from about April through August. That was pretty intense at that time.
What was your closest call?
What's that?
Did you have any close, like extremely close calls?
The closest call, I think, probably was that we had 2 C-17s on the North D'Arm pad, and we think they were 2 107 rockets that came in, and they blew up right in between the 2 17s. It was a miracle that either one of them or both of them weren't hit and destroyed. And so that actually pushed some of the crew chiefs. One of the crew chiefs ended up getting a little bit of shrapnel from the incoming at that point. What it did, though, it completely eviscerated one of the cockpits of one of the C-17s, so that bird couldn't fly anymore, and the other one ended up having a lot of holes in its fuselage, and long story short, they were able to say that none of the critical systems were affected by that, so they were able to put some speed tape on all the holes and then fly that one out. But that other one sat there waiting for a maintenance repair team to come in, and it became like a target for them. Now they saw this plane sitting there, and they would just try to, again, launch rockets at it. Eventually they were able to get that bird repaired and have that bird fly out. But a lot of the bigger planes, like the C-5s, they would not even shut engines down. They would land, they drop the back, they keep the engines running, they do a hot offload, they call it, and then as soon as they get everything out of there, they put it back up and they're out of there. They didn't want to stay anywhere.
Did you ever get to go into Baghdad yourself, or you just mostly on the base?
So I had a team, I personally know, but I had a team that worked for me, a tactical security element that worked for me. Their job was to be able to go out and protect the OSI agents that would go out and be able to gather intelligence or talk to agents and be able to try to action them. So they would go on missions all the time. So I would watch them as they're out there on Blue Force Tracker, and I could see where they are. So they ended up having a couple of engagements while they were out there at that time. But no, I didn't have any direct fire conflicts at this stage, because again, we were kind of within the base perimeters themselves, and we were fortunate that we had the Army as the major force provider outside within the AOR.
What else do you remember about Iraq?
I remember that it was hot and cold. When we first got there, we actually had a day where there was a snowstorm, and we couldn't even believe it, that it was actually snowing in Iraq. I can remember standing there. It didn't last very long, but it was gone. But you'd have huge dust storms. There'd be dust storms where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. You'd have to be able to kind of get out there and still get the mission accomplished. I remember the indirect fire, at all times, day and night. Running from your bunk to get to the bunker, with your gear, trying to get all that stuff going at the same time, bumping into people as you run into the bunker. I remember it was long days, long missions every day while we were out there. We had the one event I remember is that we had an Air Force Reserve C-130 that came from one of the other bases. It stopped at our base to pick up a whole bunch of people, to include the CFAC. a two-star that was kind of running the air operations there in Iraq. And they took off, and they didn't get too far out, maybe 5 miles out, and they had 4 engines all fail at the same time. The pilot did a great job. He was able to get through the valleys, get through all this other stuff, and he ended up landing in this field. But they landed right in the middle of the insurgency area of responsibility. So it was all hands on deck, trying to make sure we did the right things from a response standpoint. Again, the Army had responsibility for that AOR, so they sent out Stryker platoons to try to be able to set up a perimeter around this aircraft. Luckily, no one was seriously injured in that crash. People were able to walk out, but the plane, I had an opportunity to take a helicopter ride out there, and as they were determining what to do with this aircraft, and the landing gear was shoved up into the fuselage. The engines, two of them were falling off. The floor in the fuselage and the plane was all rippled all up. I mean, it was a miracle that plane wasn't in worse shape and more people were hurt. But pilot did a great job getting in there, and then we had to figure out with the Air Force Reserve. And at that time, I was an 05 lieutenant colonel. My group commander was an 06, and so I was part of his staff. And we were getting a lot of conversations about what to do with this aircraft. Well, the insurgency was targeting this aircraft and saying that they shot it down. So it was kind of a propaganda thing for them. So word came down that we had to demilitarize the aircraft, like take all the decals all off, that get all the vital components all out of it. And then it further came down later on that we were going to have to destroy this aircraft. So our local EOD guys went out there and put some det cord all the way around the whole thing, and you can search for it online, and they blew it up. And then we had to take all those pieces and bring them back on the base so that later on there could be the safety investigation board and then the accident investigation board to determine why that aircraft went down. So that was kind of amazing to see that, and some of our guys were involved with that from the standpoint with the convoy and security and preparing and protecting the aircraft parts and pieces when they got back on base.
Well, you were lieutenant colonel at this time. What's it like leading a large amount of airmen?
It was an interesting command. I also had approximately 70 Ugandan soldiers that were there that were attached to my squadron that were part of the security element. So I had my normal Air Force security forces members, and then I had the Ugandan soldiers. So I would go to the different guard mounts and go over and talk to the Ugandan officer and the sergeant major in charge there, and so I was kind of split between the two forces, making sure that they were integrating really well with our forces, and it was a good partnership. They were very good at it. You have to rely on your people. You have to rely that they know their job and that they're going to do what's necessary at this stage, and you go forth. You all have a common goal. You have a common focus, and you just give clear directions. You follow up. You make sure things are going well. Your job as a commander is to take care of your people first and foremost. You take care of them, they take care of the mission, and they'll take care of you.
When did you get out of Iraq?
I left the second tour in September of 2008. So I've been over there for 9 months.
And then what did you do for the rest of your career?
So I got back from Iraq as a security forces member, and then I had the opportunity to take an assignment at the headquarters in Massachusetts, where I was able to pin on 06. So I was the director of staff to the 2-star and the 1-star that were running operations within the state and reporting to the adjutant general at the time, the 2-star on the Army side. So I did that for a couple of years, and then had the opportunity to come back to the wing. At the time, the wing had converted from A-10s to F-15 Eagles, the C and D models. And so I had the opportunity to come back and take over as the F-15 group commander. So I was back in aircraft maintenance again, which I couldn't have been more pleased about, and had to learn a whole new weapon system with the F-15. And so I was in charge of about 500 men and women who were part of the aircraft maintenance group. And I was thrilled to do that, did that job for about 3.5 years, I think it was. And then had the opportunity to take over as the vice commander. So I was the vice commander of the wing, thereby supporting the wing commander and making sure that everything was getting done internally as well as supporting him externally. And then after a couple of years, I had the opportunity to take over as wing commander, which was a unique opportunity because normally pilots are always in charge of flying wings. Rated officers are in charge of flying wings. And obviously I was a non-rated officer, but I had been so involved in the organization for so long and knew kind of just about everything on how a fighter wing would operate, especially being in aircraft maintenance and then serving as the vice, that at the time there was a gap in the rated chain of command, and they turned and said, well, then it's going to be Colonel Green that takes over the wing. And so I was honored and proud to be the first non-rated wing commander of a fighter wing in the Air National Guard, and I did that for about 2 years before I had the opportunity to again get promoted and go back to the headquarters there as a brigadier general, and I served there for 2.5 years before I retired.
What was being a general like during COVID?
You know, it's interesting. I was honored to be promoted to brigadier general. When you get to lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, that's pretty damn impressive. If you get to colonel, okay, now you're in a smaller pool. To get to brigadier general, I mean, you're talking eaches at this point, and it's a very different role. I was in a role to support at that time the 2-star that was in charge of the overall National Guard. So my job was to be an advisor to him, which I did, and then to look out at ways to be able to improve the Mass National Guard. So I did that through focuses on innovation, for example, helping our Mass National Guard figure out how to innovate and do things quicker, faster, smarter, or use technology to get things done and get accomplished. So that was pretty. I liked that assignment a lot because it got a chance for me to use my corporate background and also use my military background. I missed the wing. Nothing like being a wing commander or being part of a wing, an operational wing, having the opportunities to be close to the men and women who are doing the job, having the opportunity to deploy. Those are things that, unfortunately, as you get higher up, and especially when you get to be a general officer, you don't get a chance to do those things much anymore.